E aí galera, beleza? Aqui quem tá falando é o Andy. E hoje eu vou fazer mais um vídeo aqui do Motoqueiro Fantasma, o Ghost Rider. Nesse vídeo, um vídeo especial, um vídeo bônus. Vamos ver aí todo o conteúdo extra que a gente tem do jogo. Tem muita coisa? Tem muita coisa pra gente assistir, pra ver? Não sei. Primeira vez que eu vou ver e eu vou estar vendo em minha primeira reação e gravando pra vocês, tá? Eu consegui durante a série desbloquear tudo. Galeria, cenas, códigos, HQs, tudo completo, beleza? Então vamos ver primeiro aqui as galerias, pacote de arte do jogo 1. Certo? Vamos lá. Modelo do Motoqueiro Fantasma. Blackout. Daqui a pouquinho, pacote de arte do jogo 2. Pintura de Legião. Da lâmina e da moto. Lilith. Espantalho. Isso aqui é tudo boss, hein, galera. Legião já mostrei. Pacote de arte do jogo 3. Demônio Razor. Moto do Demônio Razor. Cara, que da hora, né, mano? Eu gosto de ver isso aqui, porque é curiosidade sobre o jogo, né, mano? Moto Ninja. Moto do motorista demoníaco. Palhaço de machado. Bom, isso aqui é um inimigo do jogo, né? Moto do palhaço. Vingança. Blackout. Moto a jato do Blackout. Espantalho. Caramba, todos têm moto, é? Demônio Razor. Katana Ninja e Shuriken. Cara, esses inimigos são chatos, viu? Tem uns que soltam magia e tem outros que defendem. Fica esperando você abrir a guarda pra bater em você. Motorista demoníaco. Esses caras aqui, mano, defende e quando tá batendo, eles soltam um combo que não tem como você parar eles. Bom, isso aqui eu já vi. Pacote de arte do jogo 4. Cuspidor de fogo. Terror Smith. Morcego infernal. Tubarão explosivo. Cara, é foda o jogo, né, mano? Como ele é feito e como tem muitos detalhes, né? Moto Bazooka. Monstro do Estrume. Legal que até a parte do bônus tá traduzida, hein? Isso é interessante, cara. Coração Negro. Tá, esse que eu já vi. Pacote de cenas. Fotos do... Tá. Um jogo que o pessoal me recomendou para trazer pro canal do PlayStation 2 é Van Helsing. Eu vi algumas gameplays e eu achei bem parecido com Devil May Cry. Pelo menos na gameplay. Eu vou procurar esse jogo pra trazer aí pra vocês, tá? Pensamentos profundos. Olha quem é, que gatinha, mano. Ui, 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 hein? Ah, acho que isso aqui já é do filme, né? Certo. Tá. Galeria Cenas. Como foi feito o Motoqueiro Fantasma.
Hi, my name's Marque. I'm the game director on
Aqui não tem legenda.
I'm going to show you now some footage from the game.
Puta, seria legal se tivesse, hein?
Weeks of development, all the way through to the present day. So, here we go. So,
interessante,
what
cara.
you're looking at here is like 1 week into Ghost Rider production, where we're literally getting the very first bike physics handling up and running, and some really early bike rider combat. Here we're just experimenting with what might work from a gameplay perspective. We've got really early AI guys on bikes trying to work out how we can get them to react to the small input changes that a player can make. Here you can see we've got a track set out with various different kind of jump sizes, so you can see the jump distances are different. We're experimenting with what works.
Cara, ele tá explicando um pouco sobre a física do jogo. A parte que tem a gameplay com a moto.
Got very early combat and player character movement. You can see it's a really early iteration of Ghost Rider. He's looking really like a beanpole. Fire in his head is really not working. It's not looking very good. This character went through about 5 different iterations before the final game. You see really early combat here, sort of.
Nossa, olha que da hora, o jogo cruzão. Tipo, né, eles mostrando o sistema de combate do jogo, né?
You can see here really early hard, and now we're starting to layer in some special effects. This is about a month or so into the project. You've got some really early demon essence being picked up, and some early weapon trails of the character. So all of this stuff has been improved over the course of the game. So what you'll see later in the movie is how the game looks now in comparison.
Nossa, tem uns combos que nem tem no jogo, né? Ele estava começando. É bem nítido que a gameplay é muito parecida com God of War. Como se fossem as lâminas ali, né? O jeito que ele bate, meu. No começo da série eu falei isso. Cara, muito interessante isso, cara.
Here's more combat. You can see more special effects being layered in now, trying to work out what works as kind of death effects for the enemies, and the ability to be able to knock enemies into the air and juggle them in the air in the early days. You know, slightly better aerial combat, slightly better firing.
Cara, pra mim o grande desafio do jogo, além dos boss, né, e tal, são os inimigos com escudo, mano. Que você tem que chegar em um certo nível ali pra poder quebrar esse escudo e matar os inimigos.
Here's an example of a grey box foot environment, where these environments are given to the artists to be textured up, and all the detail added later. The arrows indicating where to go for the artists, so they know to highlight those doors for the player, with lighting so the player knows which direction to head in the game. Here you can see the grey box transition through to an environment that is not a complete environment yet, and you'll see better versions of these later in the game. The blue textures there on Ghost Rider we had to change. Marvel didn't like the use of blue there. They didn't feel it was in keeping with Ghost Rider, so we were asked to change it to the red that's in the final game. Here this is Ghost Town bike level being played. Still quite early days. You can see a lot of bugs there that have been ironed out. Here's version of the carnival. There's a lot of special effects and detail missing from this level that appears in the final game. The sky isn't there, and the lack of bloom as well. So although it's starting to look a little bit nicer now and starting to look more like a proper game.
Tá vendo que o jogo tem muita diferença nessa parte, que o jogo tá faltando um acabamento, né? Até os logos ali, a barra de vida, enfim. Bacana. Que existe um processo como o jogo é feito, etapas, né?
Here's a good example of the grey box turning into an early version of the level and turning into the final version of that bar.
Os caras podiam fazer uma continuação desse jogo, hein? Ia bombar, cara. Ia bombar, mano. Esse jogo me surpreendeu muito. Esse tipo de jogo com essa gameplay eu sempre gosto, né?
and then, you know, special effects, sky and bloom added, makes the whole thing look really special. This is where we started to add cinematic moments into the game to introduce enemies to the player, so new enemies are introduced in cool ways. Loads of animated environment objects in this room. All this stuff was layered in kind of the last 4 months of development. This whole train sequence was a lot of fun to develop. Here you can see the levels and the bike physics. In its early days, very awkward to handle bike, which we spent a lot of time polishing to make the bike easier to handle in these kind of difficult and complex sort of situations with enemies. We also did quite a bit to make the enemies themselves more visible, adding glows to them too. We added track symbols as well. You can see the arrows there that help guide the player around the track, so it's a bit easier for the player just to subconsciously know which direction to go.
É bem provável que esse vídeo vai ficar bem longo, viu? Mas eu vou mostrar tudo sobre o jogo, que vale a pena. É uma pena que não tenha legenda em português, né, mano? Eu queria entender ali certinho. Mais sobre o jogo, né? E aprofundar um pouco mais.
Thanks for watching. Hope that's given you an insight into what it takes to make a game like Ghost Rider. Hope you've enjoyed playing it as much as we've enjoyed making it.
Certo. Uma jornada pelo desenvolvimento do Motoqueiro Fantasma com o diretor do jogo, Marque Simons. Uma entrevista com o artista principal. Tá, vamos ver isso aqui.
Hi, my name's Neil Williams. I'm the art manager on Ghost Rider, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the art production on the project. I'll begin by talking a bit about the characters themselves and the process of getting them into the game. As soon as the concepts have been approved, first internally, then by a publisher and then by Marvel, they are passed on to the character art team who set about realising these visions. In the 3D art package used on Ghost Rider, a 3D mesh is created, then tweaked and improved until we have an accurate representation of the concept that will also work within the limitations of the game. Once we're happy with a model, it is rigged to a skeleton and then passed to the animation team to bring it to life. We're also able to add cool effects such as specular highlights to the characters to help bring them to life even more. We're going to talk a bit about the levels that we created for Ghost Rider now. The first stage of development is pre-production, during which the content and design of the game are thrashed out and scheduled. During this period, the art development on Ghost Rider began with a collection of reference materials from various sources.
Que legal, ele tá mostrando imagens ali reais que foram usadas para inspiração dos cenários, para criação dos cenários do jogo. Muito da hora mesmo. Ou imagens de artes, na verdade, né? Foram usadas para criar os cenários do jogo. Esse cenário, por exemplo, que é meio tipo faroeste, né? Essa parte do bar me lembrou muito Devil May Cry, né?
But as it is set chronologically after the film, we were able to incorporate a few more fantasy-based locations as an acknowledgement of the character's comic book origins, such as Mephisto's Hell and an abstract take on the Quentin Carnival. In these instances, we were able to let our artists' imaginations run wild, with sometimes disturbing results. Because of the scope of the project and the tight time frame, there were a few casualties along the way. Probably the most lamented by the team was a level set amongst the windswept cornfields and trailer parks of a mythic American Midwest, culminating in an epic battle in an old disused barn being literally ripped apart by a rampaging storm. The process of creating the levels themselves, after all the concepts and on-paper designs have been agreed, is the production of the grey box. This is created by the level design team and is essentially an empty shell of a level, incorporating aspects such as the in-game camera movement and playable area. Once this initial phase is complete, the environment artist takes over production of the level and focuses purely on the visual aspects of it. The first step is to build a new mesh with a suitable polygon structure that will allow the artist to proceed with the next stages, texture mapping and then vertex lighting. Background effects played a big part in bringing the levels to life. These were incorporated into the level by our environment team. Special effects is a burgeoning discipline in the video game industry, and it's an area we knew from day one we had to get right for Ghost Rider. Some of the cooler effects in the game were created for the boss levels, for example, as Ghost Rider pursues vengeance up the Hellscraper amid a maelstrom of frenzied attacks and explosions whilst the environment disintegrates around. Tools used were written in-house to the specifications of the artist using them, and so were tailored very well to creating exactly the visual effects extravaganza that we want the Ghost Rider to be. The effects in Ghost Rider are created through an extensive combination of animated geometry, shaders and textures. On top of this, we adapted our in-house particle system Particlex to PS2 and PSP to create a comprehensive suite of special effects tools, giving our artists an unprecedented level of control over a range of parameters. These are also enhanced by code-based effects such as distortion, motion blur and such like that are added in the world editor at a later stage. A great emphasis was put on creating strong effects for Ghost Rider's attacks, yielding some truly spectacular results. Once a player has progressed through a few levels, acquired some demon essence and brought a few upgrades in the caretaker's shop, and then we'll really see what Ghost Rider is all about as they uncover a range of progressively more wild and devastating moves.
Cara, o jogo tem muitos combos que eu não usei. Assim, né? Muito combo que eu nem usei, mano. Uma entrevista com o designer-chefe Sam Barlow. Cara, vamos ver tudo, né?
I'm Sam Barlow, and I'm the lead designer on the Ghost Rider game. I'm here to answer some of your questions, give you an insight into the design process on a game like Ghost Rider. In my case, it all started with the comics. My boss came in and said we're looking at making a Ghost Rider game, at which point I got quite excited. So at that point I went away and I read the rest of the comics, every single one of them. Then I read the script for the movie, chatted to some of the movie guys, got a feel for what they were doing with the movie, the sort of horror western. And we then got together with the publisher and we brought in two Marvel writers, Jimmy Palmiotti and Garth Ennis. They were on board to come up with the storyline, some of the setting. So we had this big roundtable discussion during which you decide what stuff is definitely going to be in the game. It's all very high level. Ghost Rider has to ride a bike at some point. You never want to play as Johnny Blaze. It's never quite as much fun to play the alter ego. I think from day one we wanted to always be the Ghost Rider. Because we were going for a sequel to the actual movie storyline, we wanted to draw in some of the characters from the comics. This is the first true Ghost Rider video game. So we wanted to make sure that there was a bridge between the movie Ghost Rider and the comic Ghost Rider. We wanted to draw in some of the elements from the comics. Jimmy drew up this big long list of the characters. In fact, his idea was to pull in the exploding sharks. Everyone agreed from day one that we wanted to do a story that took place after the movie. When you're creating a movie, and obviously with Ghost Rider, where it's the first Ghost Rider movie, they're trying to cover a lot of the backstory. There's a lot of the heart-to-heart stuff in there. So you want to understand about Johnny, Roxanne, his father's death, that kind of thing. That isn't necessarily compelling material for a game. They know who the Ghost Rider character is when they get to the end of the movie. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to take up from the end of the movie and just go with this cool character Ghost Rider. And the starting point for the storyline was basically coming up with a list of characters that we wanted to meet through the course of the game. So it ends up being this kind of road movie structure where Ghost Rider's chasing these various evil souls who've escaped from hell. Which characters have to be in there? We knew Blackheart had to be. We wanted to get Lilith in there. Blackout had to be in there. He was probably my favourite character from the comics. A Scarecrow everyone wanted to see. I think for me the one I really wanted to see in there was Zodiac. He was this kind of green guy with a big cigar who was a serial killer superhero. We wanted to get some of the cooler Lilin in there. We kind of paid tribute to them with the actual Lilin Side Beast character who's in the game. Deathwatch turns up on the PSP in multiplayer. I'd have loved to have seen him in there as a boss fight. Probably for me the one character who I absolutely wanted in the game and isn't in the game and would definitely be in there if there was a sequel was Death Ninja. He was one of Deathwatch's ninjas, but he died and he came back again, and he was this weird supernatural zombie ninja. To me that's the epitome of a game character. A couple of big elements that probably changed over the Ghost Rider development. Initially some of the boss fights were conceived as quite different. So when you fought Vengeance, he was on top of this giant flaming dragon, and I think he had Roxanne in a little cage beneath him. He had to rescue her. We also had Blackout. Rather than riding this sort of futuristic watercraft, Blackout actually was on a giant Leviathan creature that was sort of being experimented on by the army. What we found with those when we started concepting them, discussing them with Marvel and the other guys, was they didn't necessarily fit in with the comic book treatment of those characters and also with the movie treatment. In order to maintain that vision and to keep everything belonging to the same universe, you know, to make sure this was actually true to the movie, that we'd reconceived those boss fights on a much more human scale. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We initially had the meeting with them out in New York and met them face to face. Then throughout the project we spoke on the phone through conference calls and various emails. I think one of the interesting things actually working with Jimmy and Garth was seeing how the different writers responded to the character of Ghost Rider, how they both had quite a different comprehension of what the character was. Garth, he kind of came at it that Ghost Rider was almost this medieval knight character. It was this sort of search for vengeance and redemption. Jimmy sees what's cool about Ghost Rider to the kids, you know, it's a biker superhero, it's a guy in biker leathers who drives a cool bike and beats people up. Garth really likes his gore. Obviously the Ghost Rider movie is a teen-rated movie, so the game has to be a teen-rated game. We'd get these scripts back from Garth. Love what you've done here, this is brilliant. Ripping Caretaker's face off. Crucify Caretaker. Don't know if they had issues with that character or something. Impaling people on church steeples, burning people at the stake, eye gougings. We're not really sure you can do that in a teen-rated game. We'd ring them up and we'd say, Garth, I'm sorry, we can't crucify the caretaker, we can't impale him on a church steeple, you know, we need to tone this down a little bit. Jimmy kind of took on the role of the elder brother who sort of kept Garth under control and helped us tone down some of the script. So it was interesting seeing the two of them work together in producing the script. I think with Ghost Rider we've got a nice balance where as you go through the game you actually feel like you're becoming more and more powerful, like a superhero. It's much more about letting the player have fun, letting the player feel really powerful against all these stupid enemies. Another aspect I'm really happy with is the kind of the fighting engine that we've developed and how that feels to play. You know, the game's all about stress management. Come home from a hard day at work, turn on Ghost Rider, power it up, bam, hitting guys, bam, hitting guys. You pick up the controller, you press bang, someone gets hit, bang again, someone else gets hit. You know, whenever you press a button, instantly you want something to happen. And that's the kind of game it is, and I think it works like that. We decided early on was to avoid having much in the way of puzzles. It always strikes me as a bit odd when you have these super powerful characters take on giant 20-foot tall demons, but you know, he has to run around and push blocks, tiptoe across a rope or climb up a ledge, push lots of blocks around to make a nice pattern or something. For me that kind of ruins this whole thing of being a super powerful dude. And I think we've achieved that with Ghost Rider. One last thing, if I can get another thing in there, that if you win the game you then unlock Blade and you can play through the whole game as Blade. And he plays slightly differently. He can't absorb health from fire, he has to suck the blood out of the demons, that kind of thing. But it's really nice to have this completely different character in there. You know, he's always in the comics meeting up with Ghost Rider, and he's one of my favourite comic characters. So the chance to do not only Ghost Rider but do Blade as well was a dream come true. Well, thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed listening to what I had to say and enjoyed playing the game. Bye.
Bom, nossa, esse aqui durou bastante, meu. Reimaginando as HQs. Vamos ver esse aqui.
The art director here on Ghost Rider. One of the things about this project, it's been really good fun for character development. One of the great things is Marvel's actually given us a lot of leeway. We've been able to take their own characters. They've allowed us to redesign their characters. Some of them are a bit more faithful, and some we've actually driven off in our own directions. You know, taking on the film's influence as well as the direction we wanted to push it in. So it's been really good fun. As you can see with some of these guys we're just about to have a look at. So one of the examples there is Scarecrow. When we actually looked at the comic version, he's quite dated. You can see from some of the artwork. He's looking very monotone. Looks like some dude in pyjamas there. We were lucky enough to actually take a lot of the themes that come through in the movie, because the movie's taken a real Western kind of horror take on the actual Ghost Rider universe. So that's something we took as inspiration for driving a lot of the characters. So our version of Scarecrow has taken on the Western theme, a lot more of the horror's gone into it. We've really accentuated the real kind of psychotic side to the Scarecrow. Lilith's one of the other characters from the Marvel universe. Again, a good example of, she did actually get redesigned through the sort of comics. She went through a whole range of changes, but something that was consistent was the large sort of V head, and she's a very kind of a dated vampire woman there. So I think a good example of how we've made it a lot more contemporary, gone down this kind of gothic biker chick kind of look. Like Ghost Rider, the movie's got its own bike. For the movie, they've totally redesigned it. Again, in the comic, it was a very dated kind of 80s look. In the movie, they've gone for a much more modern, metallic, kind of almost Geiger-esque finish. That's something we kind of keyed on a lot for the game. So as well as combat, there's a lot of bike action. So we actually had to create a lot of our own motorbikes for our actual characters, but obviously taking that fancy element a lot further. So if people like Vengeance, we've taken that kind of theme from his design into his motorcycle. And same with Lilith, coming back to Lilith, she's got this very kind of slick, goth chick style design. As well as the more famous catalogue characters in the Marvel world, we've actually designed up some of the less famous characters. So we've actually got Death Watchers Ninjas and Mutt Monster. Again, they've been really good fun to design. Marvel have been kind enough to give us a lot of leeway and actually redesign these characters. So they've kind of strayed quite away from the preconceived designs. One of the more encouraging things about the designs we've done here, Marvel have actually taken some of their own designs, like Scarecrow, Vengeance. They've actually generated toys off our own designs, so that's gone down pretty well. So cheers for listening, and I hope you've
Nossa,
enjoyed
como avançou a tecnologia, né? A qualidade do vídeo, né, mano? Olha isso. Cê é louco. É, e colocar isso tudo em um console com a configuração que nem que nem o PS2, né, mano? Cê é louco. Vamos voltar aqui. Códigos. Invencibilidade. Matar em um golpe. Ataques de carga infinito. Espírito infinito. Modo turbo. Motoqueiro Fantasma Ultimate. Oxi. Tá, esse aqui eu nunca testei. HQs. Ah, que legal. Motoqueiro Fantasma do volume 1. Tá, Nascimento. Ah, que legal. O original. Interessante. Aqui já é um conteúdo pra quem é bem nerd, tá ligado? E é fã do Ghost Rider, né? Renascimento. Imagine um desse original, né? Deve valer uma boa grana. Em bom estado, né? Existe até um departamento que classifica os gibis, né, meu? E valoriza eles conforme uma classe. Espantalho. Cara, bem tenebroso mesmo, hein? Até que não vai ficar tão grande não esse vídeo. Essas HQs não foram desbloqueadas. Sério que ainda tem mais, mano? Olha! Caraca, mano. Tá, não tá desbloqueado e eles não falam como é que desbloqueia, né? Nossa, e eu pensando que ia mostrar todo o conteúdo extra, mano. Não, ainda tem isso aqui. Provavelmente a gente tem que fazer mais alguma coisa no jogo para poder liberar isso aí, mas beleza. Fizemos um videozinho bônus aí, mostrando o conteúdo extra do jogo. Praticamente tudo não, porque tem aquelas HQs ali que tem que desbloquear ainda, que eu nem sabia. Mas valeu. Mais um videozinho aí de Ghost Rider no canal. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. Por favor, não esqueçam de clicar no like, comentar no vídeo para ajudar a divulgar o vídeo e o canal. Um grande abraço, fiquem com Deus e até o próximo vídeo. Falou!